And so I look at a broader model, the 7 levels of healing. I look upstream, I look at the family system. We know epigenetically that you don't escape the fate of your forefathers. What fate your forefathers went through, you don't escape it. You epigenetically manifest their experiences. And if they have unresolved experiences, traumas, murders, deaths, you don't escape it. You can study it extensively. Many studies now. Mainstream research, this is not esoteric research. The children that have been born since the since the trade centers went down, higher incidence of PTSD, even though they weren't there, they were just epigenetically transmitted. So lots of these events occur. We know through cognitive behavioral therapy, if you don't change the way you interpret reality, you can release a whole storm of inflammatory and toxic neurochemistry, which then influences your cellular expression of microRNA, which then influences cellular outcomes. So your very thoughts, every single thought you think, 60,000 thoughts a day, depending on how you bias those thoughts, determines physiological outcome. That's what CBT is all about. Those of you who know about CBT. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is all about changing the way you interpret reality based on a new worldview. We have a saying in the world that we don't heal until we actually have a new image, a new way of interpretation, a new way of looking at the world. And we also don't heal until we align with our mothers and fathers and our ancestors. Those of you who hate your mothers and fathers, those of you who are cut off from your mothers and fathers, those of you who judge your mothers and fathers for not having given you enough, you need to maybe open that up and look a bit closer. Because you are half your mother and you are half your father. How are you going to heal when you cut off half your life force? Can't do it. I tell my kids, when they meet new partners, I said, here's your screening tool. Ask them one question. Ask the person you're in front. How are you with your mother and father? Just ask that question. If they tell you they hate their mother and father, they're estranged, they don't want to see them again, run like hell. Not going to go well. And I tell you, that's a very reliable indicator for how people are in the world. And so we use a much larger model to view and interpret people's health. Just by way of some definitions, dementia is when cognition falls, but Alzheimer is characterized by these particular findings that you find in the brain, the tangles and the amyloid plaque. That defines Alzheimer's. And although it starts with memory loss, it very soon ends up in the inability to formulate language and then socialize, and then eventually end up in the reptilian brain side of things, where you function, you can eat, you can sleep, but your whole orientation to the world outside of you is shut down. There are different types of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common, but there are other types. And if you go and see a neurologist, neurologists are extraordinarily good diagnosticians. So if anybody has a dementing type process or cognitive decline, you really do want to see your neurologist, because they have the ability to really discern the subtleties of different types of dementia and how they're expressed. The thing that really differentiates Alzheimer's disease from other forms of dementia, as I said, is this ApoE4 gene. If you have the 3-3 gene, you have a 9% risk of Alzheimer's. If you have the 3-4 gene, you have a 30% risk, 3 times increased risk. And if you have the 4-4 gene, you have 50 to 90% risk potential of developing Alzheimer's disease as you age, if you don't do something to change the inputs. There is a website, apoe4.info, for people with ApoE4 genes, because they are aware now of how profound this gene is. And this website is dedicated to informing individuals with the gene what they can do to downregulate the potentially negative outcomes of disease expression. I'm going to kind of skip some of the basics because I know I'm going to run out of time, but here's just the hallmark of Alzheimer's is these tangles which are in the neurofibrils here, and the amyloid plaque, which are outside. Between these tau tangles and these amyloid plaques, this creates an inflammatory response which shuts down neuronal, synaptic communication, which kills neurons. So as your synapses die from these tangles, neurons die, your brain atrophies, and dementia can ensue. And if you had to look at what at the most minute level, what's really going on in Alzheimer's disease, it has everything to do with the interplay between trophic factors and blastic factors, growth factors and destructive factors that influence one particular protein called the amyloid precursor protein. This is where amyloid plaque comes from. It comes from this protein. It's a subset of it. And you have what are called molecular scissors or proteases that come along and they snip through this amyloid precursor protein. If it makes one snip, you get the anti-Alzheimer's outcome. If it makes 4 snips, you get the pro-Alzheimer's outcome. So the entire Bredesen protocol is everything to do with how do you influence these molecular scissors to favorably produce the 2 pieces of amyloid precursor protein as opposed to the 4. That's what it is. What can you do to drive support for neurons as opposed to destruction for neurons by influencing these molecular switches? That's it, at the molecular level anyway. And just so we don't go straight into Alzheimer's disease, before Alzheimer's occurs, there's a subjective cognitive decline that can occur. People for 10, 15 years may say, I'm just off my game, I'm not as smart as I used to be. Now, normal aging produces this. Our brains slow down. But if you are going down the dementing route, if you're going down the Alzheimer's route, you may start in a preclinical way, and some of your tests may be already positive before anybody else picks it up. It's subjective. And then you actually start to get mild cognitive decline, where you actually objectively are now starting to register negatively with specific testing. I can't tell you how many people come to my office who are running corporations, CEOs, with mild cognitive decline. Their biochemistry, their markers of cognition, they fail. They're still operational, but they've got objective signs of decline. And then when you lose tasks of daily living, you start to go down the dementing path. There is a difference between dementia and normal aging. You know the whole key, I forgot my keys. But people with just normal aging usually remember when they trace their movements, that's where I left them. And so forth. And so there are some differences, but there's a bit of a fuzzy line in the beginning. As I said, those of you on the right side of your biology, when your brain's at 300 milliseconds and you still got good brain speed, you're not so concerned about this, but I'm on the other side of that. And I'm very concerned about things like this. That's why I started the Brain Treatment Center, not only to help patients, I had a selfish interest. I want to keep my brain moving at 300 milliseconds, as much as I can, for as long as I can. So this is the difference. And this has everything to do with brain speed. Our brains move at 300 milliseconds per second. After age 20, every decade, 10 milliseconds are lost, just through normal aging. That's profound, When your brain speed slows down, you literally slow down. When your brain slows down, neurons and synapses die. And there may be a bad outcome if you don't do something about it. There's a separation between thinking and doing. And we can just get, there's many reasons why people's brains slow down or are exacerbated by lifestyle issues that don't lead to necessarily a dementing Alzheimer's illness. Aging is the #1 cause of brain slowing down. But then strokes and stress and all, people drink far too much. It's a neurotoxin. They get addicted to certain things. Prescription medications, profound. I mean, you have no idea. Statins, given out like candy. They shut down cholesterol. Cholesterol is a building block of brain neurons and myelin. It's just not okay. You've got to think before people go onto these drugs, you know? And so with people coming to the office, we suggest they go through something called the cognoscopy. Everybody at age 50 gets a colonoscopy, free, under healthcare. Now, future. Start spreading the word. Ask your friends. Ask your parents. Mom, have you undergone a cognoscopy? A cognoscopy is a brain evaluation. Now, your mother will say no, because it doesn't exist in the healthcare system. You can't get a cognoscopy. But we can plant the seed. We can start thinking about it. It will happen. Because, as I said in the beginning, try living one day without a functional brain. It's awful. So we do questionnaires, and do any of you recognize this? MOCA? You recognize it? Do you remember Donald Trump 2 months ago? He flashed this and said, I'm brilliant, I'm a genius. No, I'm serious, he did. He passed the most elementary of cognition testing called the MOCA. And he got, this is a 5-minute test. He got 30 out of 30. But people with dementia, they fail it, you know. Anybody with a score less than 19, you're on the wrong side of your MOCA score. The average Alzheimer's patient is around 16, 16.2. 19 to 22, those people with dementia, if they can't take care of daily tasks of living, that's a serious prognosis. And mild cognitive impairment, they have a MOCA score of 22 to 25. People who pass 26 and up. You want to be in that range. So I suggest you get your brains assessed. And even if you do this, you can do it online. It takes 5 minutes. We have in our center the CNS vital signs, which is a computerized measurement of cognition. You can see this is one of our Alzheimer's patients. They can't perform the tasks, the executive tasks, which the frontal lobe performs, of just orientating themselves to what we take for granted. Completely failed, as opposed to somebody with relatively normal executive functioning in the world. And you see how the brain atrophies, and the brain atrophy starts in this part of the brain called the medial temporal cortex. That's the hippocampus. The hippocampus is where we lay down new memories. It has limited capacity, but we lay down new memories in the hippocampus. And as the dementing process spreads, it reduces the hippocampal neurogenesis and the nerves start to die. But then it spreads throughout the brain. And this is a typical brain with Alzheimer's. It really is shrunk. It's quite remarkable when you see it on MRI. And there's many imaging techniques which are used, MRIs, FDG PET scans, amyloid PET scans. There's all kinds of diagnostic tests we use to try and assess one aspect of the Alzheimer process. And we've recently introduced in Canada, this is the only center in Canada that has what's called the NeuroQuant MRI. And this has to be privately ordered. You can't get this through healthcare. I've asked, they won't do it. But this NeuroQuant MRI actually measures objectively the size and compares you to a normative database of particularly the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. These are the two parts that go first. They shrink. And we can objectively measure it and compare it to other people's brains. A normal MRI doesn't do this. And here you can see the hippocampus is reduced. We also do QEEGs, and we see the brain slowing down. That's a slowed brain wave that we measure through a QEEG. And then we get to Dr. Bredson's 6 types of Alzheimer's disease. And here, we really have to understand the different 6 subtypes to learn how to work them up and how to treat them. If we don't understand them according to this model, we can't treat it. And so the subtypes are A, the inflammatory model. Here, inflammation is at the root cause of the Alzheimer's expression. And there's all these inflammatory markers which get expressed, and ApoE4 is the most important risk factor for that. And here you see the hippocampus atrophied. And then you've got to seek out all the causes of inflammation. And all of you know this work very well. food, gut health, leaky gut. This is at the basis of this inflammatory subtype. We look at the causes of leaky gut. These are all lifestyle issues. And we can actually measure how leaky your gut is and how leaky your brain is. You can actually measure now with specific labs the leakiness of your barrier functions. And you can measure gut ecology and look at inflammatory factors. You can measure and look at zonulin. Zonulin is the protein that causes leakiness, and histamine that makes it worse. And then you can actually measure the protein, the lipopolysaccharide coating of bacteria that leak across the gut and cause an inflammatory response. These are called LPS, lipopolysaccharides. This is the root of many inflammatory brain disorders. Look at all the diseases that get expressed when lipopolysaccharides get expressed. And you look at food sensitivities. There's many different ways to look at food sensitivities. Many people come and see me, they've done one IgG test. That's not it. You have to look at different immunological pathways to look at food expression. One test at our local private lab for IgG foods is not how you work up food sensitivity testing. You must learn about the other methodologies because they are extremely relevant, and what may be positive in one may be negative in the next. We do a whole ton of work around gluten. Gluten, as you know, nobody processes gluten well. Even if you have or don't have celiac, even if you have or don't have gluten sensitivity, nobody has the enzymes to break down the gluten molecule. Nobody. Dr. Vazano, the great gluten researcher, said this for 10 years. You get a leaky gut from gluten. Now, those of you without the bad genes can repair it within hours. But every time you have gluten, you have a leaky gut. Quick repair, okay. But we measure the gluten molecule in all of its subsets with specialized labs. And we measure antibodies, cross-reactive foods. Gluten cross-reacts with food, with different foods. How many of you like coffee? How many of you like coffee and are gluten sensitive? How many of you knew coffee performs molecular mimicry and ignites the same pathways as gluten may? Just a thought. Particularly horrible thought. And then we can measure antibodies to specific tissue. We can measure antibodies against all of our organs, and particularly we can actually measure our immune system's attacking of core neurological structures, synapses, tubulins, myelin. You can see how under attack your brain is when you start doing these tests. Dentistry. How many of you lump dentistry and health together? How many of you lump dentistry and medicine together? It's a separated discipline in the present way it's practiced. We can't work without doing extensive dental work. I do a Panorex and 3D cone beam CTs looking at periodontal disease, root canals, mercury fillings, dissimilar metals, implants, cavities. There's a whole slew of toxic potential existing in the mouth. Multiple studies, periodontal disease and the risk of Alzheimer's disease. We do periodontal workups. The second subtype is the glycotoxic, the type that causes too much sugar. Sugar, as you all know, is a potent toxin. It should be a classified substance. I mean, considered in the 300 years ago to be so sought after, like cocaine is today. People would seek it out because they knew it's how it made you feel temporarily. And people. Our bodies can't cope with more than 15 grams of sugar a day. What's one diet soda? 40 to 100 grams? Not diet soda, just the sugar soda. 40 to 100 grams of sugar. We can't cope with this huge input of sugar. I mean, I know you all know this. But this is the second subtype that causes dementing processes. And then we get the atrophic type. The atrophic type is the type that as the brain ages, it loses neurotropic support, vitamin D. zinc, estrogen, testosterone, pregnenolone, DHEA. All of it gets withdrawn as we age. If there's one thing in my practice that I enjoy the most, is to see a postmenopausal woman who's not dementing but who has cognitive decline go back onto bioidentical hormones, and they are so happy. 3 months later, they come in and the first thing they'll say, I can't believe it, I got my brain back. Why? Estrogen is a nootropic, neuroblastic hormone. It improves synaptic connections, it improves dopamine, it changes cognition dramatically. So this is the second type. And the third subtype is the subtype that is toxic. This is a subtype of people, it's a different presentation of Alzheimer's. It's usually in younger people. It's not so much influenced by the APE4 gene. And they usually present with a lot of frontal lobe symptoms as opposed to the typical hippocampal memory loss. But they do get, the first sign of somebody who's got a toxic sort of brain is somebody who can't multitask anymore. They used to do 5 things and now they can't. They just have to delegate. And that's one of the first symptoms. And you have a whole new world of work being done by Richie Shoemaker and others on chronic inflammatory response syndrome. This is where the innate immune system is upregulated due to mold and Lyme, and it causes this very specific profile of inflammation through the innate immune system, which affects the brain, and it affects all your neuropeptides in the brain, which regulate leaky gut, which regulates hormones, which regulate oxygen delivery to mitochondria. This is a whole subset of work that's going on, not in mainstream medicine. You won't see it, you won't find it, it's not there. But it's in the research literature. And we do certain things in our clinic to try and find out. We do questionnaires of that particular type 3 chronic inflammatory response. We look at visual contrast to see if people fail this test. And we do spore counts and mold counts in their homes. And then we look at metals. Heavy metals is a big cause, and pesticides and air pollution and Lyme disease. How many people have heard all about Lyme disease? Yeah, epidemic. Doesn't exist in Alberta, right? Yeah. My entire day, day to day, week to week, is made up by mold and Lyme toxic people. And they travel, they get it from other sources. And we believe now, the literature is quite clear, that Lyme disease may not just be a tick-borne illness. It may be transmitted by other vectors. And there's literature done here in Calgary by Maureen Middleveen that it may be sexually transmitted as well. On the record, this hasn't been, published in peer-reviewed journals, but the literature is out there making those suggestions. And Lyme's disease is, we find the pathogen inside the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. We find herpes simplex 1, good old cold sore, big cause of Alzheimer's. Pesticides, a big link between pesticides and Alzheimer's. Glyphosate, how many of you eat organic food? Even organic food is riddled with glyphosate because of cross-contamination. It's everywhere. Glyphosate is highly toxic to many core organs. It causes gut permeability. It shuts down neuronal pathways. Then the vascular subtype is from people with hypertension and atherosclerosis, which decreases oxygen supply to the brain, causing Alzheimer's decline. And then we get the traumatic, the brain-injured people. I mean, look at these statistics. Not all head trauma patients will develop Alzheimer's, but there's a 2.3 times increased incidence in mild or moderate traumatic brain injury. 4.5 increase in severe brain trauma. There are no studies linking mild brain injury to Alzheimer's disease, but 3 or more concussions, 5-fold higher risk for memory loss and cognitive impairment. And I'm out of time. And well, There's a whole slew of lab tests you can do to sort of think through this problem. You won't get it under healthcare. You won't get it from your family doctor. In fact, you'll get dismissed. So it's up to you to educate yourself. Dr. Bredson's book, The End of Alzheimer's, is fabulous. I suggest you read it. And you start working through your own cognoscopies, how you can work yourself up to see if you are at risk. And then therapeutically, there's at least 36 things you can do to downregulate cognitive decline and or Alzheimer's, of which, guess what's number one? Nutrition. One last word, ketogenic diet seems to trump every other diet when it comes to changing brain outcomes. Combine that with good sleep, exercise, stress reduction. You've got the 4 pillars of turning down mild cognitive decline and potential dementia. And then you can look at all the other factors which influence outcomes and just teach yourself, because nobody out there is going to teach it to you, and you definitely won't get it from your medical doctors. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lonnie. That was amazing. If you have questions, please come and use the mic. We've got about 8 minutes for questions. And at 9:30, you might get cut off right in the middle because we'll be live streaming on Toronto. So, questions?
Just a quick one. I know vitamin D is a really controversial topic right now, and it is linked to inflammation, especially with autoimmunity. So what do you recommend for dosing, food versus supplements in winter versus summer?
So those are the foods that contain vitamin D. This is how you can calculate your vitamin D needs, but I can tell you it's not that accurate. Every Calgarian that I've ever seen who's not on vitamin D supplements is vitamin D deficient. Everyone. But you can't tell them how much to take because everybody has a variation in the amount they need, depending on A, their VDR receptor, which is from the 23andMe gene, because the people with the VDR++ gene need a lot more vitamin D. The state of the small intestine. Small intestines is where you absorb vitamin D, and many people have very disrupted small intestines, and they have SIBO and small bowel overgrowth, SIFO, fungal overgrowth, and they don't absorb the B vitamins. And you need the D vitamins, and you need a lot of oil and fat because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. I can't tell you how many people are fatty acid deficient. Like the majority of people, by far. Everybody's got omega-3s. That's epidemic now. Everybody comes in, they're all taking fish oil. Fish oil isn't it. It's got benefits. But you need your omega-3s, your 6s, your 9, your monounsaturates, your saturates, in order to get vitamin D and vitamin A and vitamin E, which are fat-soluble vitamins, to be absorbed appropriately. So to answer that question, it's complex. My patients hate me. They always ask me questions. I say, I'm not sure, it's complex. They go, just give me an answer. I can't. Then I do 10 minutes of explanation. They go, oh, I see. And so that's the kind of complexity that is required to answer that question.
Sorry, can I ask something? Yeah. Come to the microphone, please.
For people in our industry, it's really hard for us to help them with stuff like this, especially now that Alberta does not test for vitamin D. So how would you recommend we help people that do come to us with these issues when we can't even send them to the doctor to get tested for it?
So, yeah, that's a great question. First of all, you can get vitamin D tested. Just so you know, there's a trick. Here's the trick. You've got to have a friendly GP who's going to lie and say you've got celiac disease or malabsorption syndrome or osteoporosis. They need to sign a form. If they sign the form, you can get it done. But I can tell you from my experience, none of them will. But if you have a good relationship with them and you can prove to them that there's a need, they will do it for you. The form, if you put a circle where it shouldn't be and you don't cross the box where it should be, you will be rejected. It's that weird. That's firstly. Secondly, you can get vitamin D from private labs. So people have to spend out of pocket. This notion of having Canadian healthcare pay for your functional medicine and well-being, please give it up. It's not going to happen. You have to have health as an extremely high value, and you have to invest in your health with your own after-tax dollars, because they won't let you deduct it, to maximize your health outcomes. Please don't think that Alberta Healthcare is going to do this for you. And I don't think they should, by the way. People always are shattered when I say that. The disease-based system, we already pay exorbitant taxes to fund the free healthcare. And they do a good job of, when we have a heart attack, go to the emergency and we get 5-star treatment in intensive care. Don't try and muddy the waters asking that system, which treats tertiary disease, to start doing preventive medicine overnight. I think it will creep in over time. But you want them to do functional medicine and preventive medicine and start to fund what you do, your taxes will be 95%. It can't happen. So please be responsible. Get rid of an adolescent fantasy that healthcare should take care of all this. It won't, and I don't think it can afford to. You have to have health as a high value. You have to invest in yourself. You have to educate yourself. You have to become your own patient advocate. And you have to do what it takes to get where you need to go. That's
Hello. Outside of the MRIs, EEGs, CAT scans, and things we have in our regular system, how do you feel about the SPEC imaging that can be done?
neurospec imaging?
Yes.
Neurospec imaging is not, it's generalized, but it's not specific. You can see signs and symptoms. You can see certain images, like the ring on fire. You're talking about Daniel Amen's work? Yeah. It's not specific, but it is done. PET scans more accurate, and some of the more advanced PET scans are more accurate. Neurospec is sort of a secondary test. I wouldn't use it as a primary, unless you got free access. Then I'd use it. Yeah.
Hi, I just saw on a slide that you said with the information that it had the Peter Ayurvedic, and I just wondered what the relationship was there.
Well, are you familiar with Ayurveda?
A little bit.
So Ayurveda talks about doshas. Doshas are constellation of elements.
Yeah.
Vata is air and space. Pitta is fire.
Yeah.
What's inflammation? Fire. Too much fire.
So someone who's a Pitta would have be more susceptible to Alzheimer's. Is that?
I don't know if that's statistically true, but theoretically, of the subtype 1 inflammation, I would posit a guess. I don't think studies have been done. Now, Bretson knows a bit about Ayurveda. I was astonished that he did. So I would think there may be some literature on that, but I can't say for sure.
Cool.
But it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pitta people are the hardest to treat, by the way.